you hear me? Yep.
Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to New Horizons. This is the first session, so it's kind of exciting to be getting things kicked off here this afternoon. My name is Ken Fairbanks. I am with Virginia Highlands Community College, and I'm the Director of Distance Learning there. I'm your room host for this afternoon. It's a very dangerous assignment for them to give me. I wanted to do some sort of great thing with strobe lights and smoke effects, and they said absolutely not. I saw we were supposed to be a bus rodeo. So if you came for the bus rodeo, you're in the wrong room. This is not it. Few housekeeping notes. If you're looking for Wi-Fi, there is an NH attendee Wi-Fi. So if you're searching for that on your phone, click on the NH attendee. I was able to get on just a few minutes ago. No password or anything appeared to be necessary, but that'll get you online. This afternoon's presentation is Open Textbook Network, helping you transition from print to open. And your presenters here today are Olivia Reinaur from Tidewater, the Portsmouth campus, Lynn Riggs from J. Sargeant Reynolds in Richmond, and then Crystal Newell from Piedmont, Virginia. And so I'm going to turn things over to them and let them present on open textbooks. And thank you for being here.
All right. Thank you, Ken. Everyone can hear me okay? Okay, I will try not to talk too loudly since the microphone is right next to my mouth, but I do get a little excited sometimes. So bear with me since this is the first session of New Horizons. Thank you for coming out and braving the hall crowds, and hopefully everyone had a good lunch. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the Open Textbook Network, and I'm going to start us off with a little bit of background information. But before I get started, I wanted a show of hands. Who in here are teaching faculty? All right, excellent. Who of you guys are librarians, as if I don't know? Okay, great. Thank you so much. So like I said, I'm going to start you guys off with a little background information because I suppose you're asking, what in the world is the Open Textbook Network? So here are our names in case y'all need to get to us again. So the Open Textbook Network is a nonprofit project from the Center of Open Education at the University of Minnesota. And what that is it's a membership-based project where colleges and institutions and consortium across the country join and become members of the Open Textbook Network. And they provide, the Open Textbook Network provides support and training to help faculty easily adopt openly licensed textbooks in particular into their classroom. So what they also do, however, is curate a collection or a catalog of free, openly licensed, and peer-reviewed textbooks called the Open Textbook Library. And Olivia and Lynn will speak more about that later on and give you some more information. But, and you all will have a chance to go in and look yourselves as well. So we are a member of the Open Textbook Network through something called the Virtual Library of Virginia. Who in here has ever heard of Viva? Awesome, you guys rock. Okay, so Viva is a library consortium of all the 72 nonprofit educational institutions in the state of Virginia, and it is partially funded by the General Assembly as well as by the member institutions themselves. Some of the resources are actually paid for through cost sharing. And they are the lovely people that bring you resources such as EBSCOhost, if you ever have a chance to use that, and as well as many of the other library resources that you can access and use in your classes as well as your students. So Viva, you may think, why in the world would Viva become a member of the Open Textbook Network? Well, Viva had a couple of goals that they wanted to get to. So what they decided is that they really wanted to assist faculty in the adoption of OER materials. And they kind of wanted to get their feet wet. They just wanted to dip their toes in a little bit and not dive in head first. So they wanted to look for a way to help faculty easily adopt textbooks, but not necessarily go whole hog and do the research and put modules together. So they went with the Open Textbook Network. And what they have decided to do is, from Viva Central Fund, so they have a budget that's budgeted again from the General Assembly, they've allotted a $200 stipend for faculty to actually peer review the textbooks that are available through the Open Textbook Library. And that comes with the membership in the Open Textbook Network. So again, why would they do this? So one of the things that partnering with the Open Textbook Network allows us to do is to provide institutional support for the Open Educational Resource Initiative, okay? So by putting money where our mouth is, we're showing that we are committed to this and that we really want to assist faculty in adopting open textbooks, all right? And by doing so, in return, the Open Textbook Network actually provides training for something called system-wide leaders and campus leaders as well. So basically, it's a train-the-trainer model. What they do is they train folks like myself and Olivia and Lynn to host workshops that then allow the faculty to look at and peer review and possibly adopt an open textbook. So they provide that kind of training, the systematic training throughout the state. And because we are a member and you all will receive the training necessary to do a peer review, you can also receive the stipend through the Open Textbook Network. So the peer reviews are only done by those folks who are a part of the OTN. And so you will find that when you go into the Open Textbook Library, so the catalog of textbooks that they have, that many of the textbooks are reviewed, and all of these folks are part of the OTN, just like we are. So they all received the same training from the system-wide and campus leaders, and then they went through the peer review process. And in our case, we have the $200 stipend. So the ultimate goal with this, however, is to really support you all who are teaching faculty in the adoption of open textbooks. We want to help you easily, or more easily, I should say, adopt those open materials in your classroom. And the reason that the Open Textbook Network focuses on textbooks is because we all know that textbook costs are ridiculous, correct? Yes, we can all agree on that. So, but the time commitment needed to adopt OER materials in a class is sometimes overwhelming. Has anybody ventured into OER land? Is it a little time consuming sometimes? A little bit. A lot of times, yes. Javille is right. It is absolutely time consuming. So the OTN, did you have a question?
Is that the reason why the faculty who attended the training, the percentage was very low? I was just shocked by that, 44. So 66% attended training and did not adapt the program?
That is correct.
That's a high percentage.
It's actually the adoption rate of 44% of those folks who have adopted is much higher through the OTN product or program than if they were on their own. So that adoption rate is actually much higher than an adoption rate.
Another percentage who tried it on their own?
Right. So folks who had tried to adopt OERs on your, this is much higher with the support. That's actually a pretty good number. I know it's under 50%, but that's actually pretty good. Thank you for that question. Right. You know, anything under 50%, you're like, But that's actually a pretty good number. And of course, we're not speaking about, grant-funded initiatives where you're mandated to do it or anything like that. So this is all voluntary. So one of the reasons that that number actually may be so good is that they do in fact focus on textbooks. And they choose to focus on textbooks because, hey, you guys are reviewing print textbooks for your classes. Why not go ahead and review one that is just electronically based and openly licensed? So the process, the thought process, is similar for a print textbook as opposed to the openly licensed textbook. The hope is that these textbooks would then at least mostly cover most of the content in your class, so that it would be an easier adoption to just go with a whole textbook as opposed to piecing together openly licensed material and trying to make modules for each chapter, okay? So all of the textbooks that are in the Open Textbook Library are in fact openly licensed and hopefully peer reviewed and free. So you have the ability, if you need to, however, modify the content that is available through these textbooks as well. But the reason they offer the peer review is that sometimes when you encounter an openly licensed work on the web, you're not really entirely sure what the quality is. And that's been one of the concerns that I've heard from my faculty a good number of times, is the quality of this textbook as good as the others? And so with the peer reviews, at least you have others in your discipline, in your field, who have looked at it based on a criteria which Lynn will explain later on in more detail, and you will know where this book falls on that spectrum of quality. And so it's kind of an easier way to introduce yourself to a text and begin looking at it as a possible adoption. Okay? Any questions? All right, so that's the background. I'm actually going to turn it over to Olivia, and she will give you a demonstration as to what the training could possibly look like, or will look like.
Okay, so sorry, I have to stand over here so that I can get picked up on the mic. Can everybody hear me okay? Great. So again, my name is Olivia Reinaur, and I'm a librarian at Tidewater Community College in Portsmouth, Virginia. And like Lynn and Crystal, I'm one of the Viva leaders who got this Train the Trainer Open Textbook Network training and are able to conduct open textbook adoption workshops at our campuses. So we thought one of the things that might be helpful to show you today, typically these workshops would be fairly involved and would take at least an hour to maybe an hour and a half and include video of students talking about the effect of high textbook costs and that sort of thing. We wanted to at least give you a preview of the information that would be included in a typical open textbook network. That is really hard to say over and over again. Adoption workshop. And this is, I would say, primarily targeted at faculty who may be newer to the idea of OER. So there may be, it seems like we have a group in here that's fairly experienced. There may be some things that you're very familiar with already, but maybe some new things as well. And just to give you an idea of the direction that the Open Textbook Network takes towards presenting the educational piece of this. So we typically start out by saying something like, you know, we all realize that college affordability is a huge issue, that textbook costs are an issue, but it's really something you can think of as even bigger as a social justice global thing. A lot of people may not realize that it's actually in the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights that higher education should be accessible to all people who want it. And I was surprised by this number. Advisory Committee for the Department of Education conducted a study and found that from 2000 to 2010, 2.4 million college qualified students did not complete college because of the affordability issue. So that's not what I would call equal access. And the workshop kind of starts by setting up the problem, and so it gets a little depressing, but then there will be a potential solution, starting to have some solutions. So this graph here shows higher education funding by states nationwide. And we talked about that even a little bit, briefly touched on it at the keynote address this afternoon. So the green line is the amount contributed by states starting in 1990, if you can't read it from back there. And then the red part is the part that the student or their family would be responsible for. So we can see what direction that's going in. I also got the data for Virginia specifically, which you can see we actually crossed over, it looks like in about 2009 there. So it's not just that, you know, it's not just inflation in general. Students truly are responsible for a higher percentage of their higher education costs than they once were. We also hear all the time about the student loan debt issue and that there's this student loan debt bubble and everything. about 2/3 of students nationwide do borrow financial aid, money for college, and the class of 2015 owed an average of about $30,000 upon graduating. I have some information here about my own two-year college. At TCC, according to Chev, we had almost 50% borrowing, and they ended up owing about $14,000 at the end of their 2 years. So we have to consider, even though they're not paying for housing, not all students may be living with their families. You know, they may have to pay for their apartment. If they're going to school full-time, they probably aren't able to work full-time, so there are costs incurred. All right, so, you know, this is an issue. What can we do about it? Well, there's not much that we can do right now about tuition and what else do we have in here? Personal expenses, transportation. Those are longer-term issues. And the OTN really has focused on the books and supplies because that's something that as faculty and other staff in higher education, we may be able to do something about this semester or next semester and that we actually have a little control over. And then the workshop typically moves into focusing on book costs specifically, and the fact that those also are not increasing at a proportional rate to our rate of inflation. So on this graph, the lower line, the greenish line, is consumer price index, which is basically inflation, I am told. I am not an economist. And then the red line is textbook prices. So that's increasing at about 3 to 4 times the standard rate of inflation. Oh, and normally, if we had a lot of time, well, let me ask you guys, if you didn't look too closely at that slide that I just flipped to, what are some of the things you think that our wily students, or that you know from teaching, that our students will do to avoid having to purchase a textbook? Any thoughts? Yeah, find it online and illegally download it on our campus networks, which is not good. What else have you had students do, or what have been the effects of students trying? What's that? Right, just don't buy it. Yeah, so it might hurt my grade a little, but you know, at least I'll have saved $200. Right, another edition that might not have exactly the same page numbers as what your instructor is telling you, but might have some similar information. Yes, so like scanning on their cell phone, basically, yeah. Anything else? Oh, right, that's, yeah. So it's a hot commodity, you know, yeah. And working in a library, I can say that we have theft of textbook type books from the libraries too. Yes. Yes. Yeah, one of the videos that I'm sorry I couldn't include today, but just due to our time, is a real in-depth interview with a student who actually chose his courses based on what his buddies were taking so that they could all share textbooks. So yeah, I think you guys hit the nail on the head. These numbers are from the Florida Textbook Survey. Some of you may be familiar with that. They conducted, it's Florida Virtual Campus. It's a fairly large survey of students. The first column is 2012 and the second column is 2016. So the numbers haven't changed too terribly much. So we have over half of students just not buying the book, maybe waiting a couple weeks or a few weeks to see if the professor is actually going to use the textbook or how much is it going to, you know, impact their grade. We have almost half of students actually taking fewer courses due to the cost of the textbook. We have almost half, again, not registering for specific courses due to the textbook cost, and even more concerning, getting a lower grade or even failing a course. So this it's not just about money in people's pockets, it's having an academic effect on students. So then in the workshop, once we've kind of presented this problem statement where everybody was like, oh no, so what can we do, right? And I often get questions from faculty that say, free textbooks sounds like a great idea, but we've always been told if it sounds too good to be true, it probably isn't. So how is that possible? Who would write a textbook and then just give it away for free? So this is kind of a very simplistic graph or a pictogram of a traditional textbook publishing model. So you get some faculty together, one or more, they write a textbook, the publisher publishes it, handles all the sales and distribution and creation of the book, and then people buy it, and then proceeds go back to the author or authors. And I don't know, has anybody in here ever published a textbook or participated in writing a textbook? Typically, the number that I hear for royalties is like 5 to 12% maybe. I don't know if anybody wants to dispute me on that. So it's not a huge, you're probably not going to get rich writing a textbook, but the authors do get some money. So I'd like to propose some potential other models. The first one is a faculty member writes a textbook, usually for their own course. Maybe they teach something specialized, or they're not happy with the other material that's available out there, so they just kind of write their own. And then out of the goodness of their hearts, publish it online and say, other people can use this. That's not that typical, but it happens. The model that has become more standard in open textbook publishing is that there's still a funder. So the authors can still be paid for the time that they take, or it may be considered as part of their duties. Maybe they course release time through their institution or something like that. And then the textbook can be given away for free. So where does the funding come from? So usually it would come from an institution, and I can show you examples of each of these types. It may come from a foundation, a government, or a consortium. So these two textbooks, the one on the left is from Portland State University, and the one on the right is Open SUNY textbooks. So these are two examples of institutions that have started their own open publishing initiatives. This you may recognize. OpenStax is, I think, one of the most frequently used or familiar publishers of open textbooks, and they're through Rice University and are funded by foundations. They're a nonprofit. This is an example of a consortium where the textbook publishing is funded by the member dues. So this is the Computer Assisted Legal Instruction Group. And all of these textbooks, I should mention, would be included in the Open Textbook Library. So the Open Textbook Library doesn't publish their own stuff. They just collect all the open textbooks out there and provide reviews of them. Okay, so I need to speed through this and make sure Lynn has plenty of time to talk to you guys about what you can do back at your campuses. The only other piece I haven't covered on this model is our copyright piece. So that's another important part of open textbooks, is that they're not just free. By default, you may know, as soon as a work enters fixed form, it is all rights reserved copyright, either by the author or the publisher, depending on what kind of contract you've worked out. So we're only able to do some of this open pedagogy and open educational resources work because of a group called Creative Commons, which is a nonprofit that has developed licenses that allow copyright holders to put this special license on their work that says, I want you to share it. You don't need to ask me for permission. I still hold the copyright, but you have permission to do whatever you want with this within limits. So that's the final piece of this open textbook publishing model. You've got your funder, you've got people who are willing to write it and then are willing to share it with a Creative Commons license so that it's free to be not just read, but used. Here, I've got some of these. Copied, remixed, downloaded, kept in perpetuity, and revised and posted out there. Okay, so sometimes we'll refer to this as the 5 R's: revise, remix, reuse, redistribute, and retain. I always forget at least one of them, sorry. All right, and then very briefly, these are the Creative Commons licenses. So if you're not familiar with these, start looking around for them. When you're looking at materials online, you will find them popping up more than you expect. Usually you look somewhere in the bottom right of the screen or somewhere on the title page for a work, you may see one of these. So the options are, from the upper left, the most open license would be CC BY, which do whatever you want with it, just provide attribution to the original creator. To some that are a little more narrow, the little arrow in a circle means share alike. So if you do update the work or remix it in any way, you have to share it back out with a Creative Commons license. You can't now, copyright that new work just for you. There's no derivatives. If you really don't want anybody messing with your work and you don't want to allow updates or changes, you can put that on there. And you can also include non-commercial so that nobody can make money off of it. All right, so that's just a brief explanation to kind of get people up to speed with the idea of open works and free open textbooks. And then one of the questions that we typically are asked are, how effective is this, right? Faculty want to know, they want studies, they want proof. So how effective and how high quality are the 2 questions we get frequently. We have at least 13 peer-reviewed studies. There's a very good site called the OER Research Hub, which is all about scholarly research on OER. And showing the efficacy, K through 12 through higher ed in these 13 peer-reviewed studies, 95% had the same or better outcomes of students, had the same or better outcomes using open textbooks or OER as students in the same courses using a traditional textbook. So that seems pretty good to me. And I think the 5%, I want to say that were not as good were in the K through 12 group rather than higher ed. I'd have to double check that. And as far as quality, if you look at a study of over 5,000 students and faculty, about 50-50 of each, across 12 peer-reviewed studies, about 50% thought that they were roughly the same quality as whatever they'd been using as a traditional textbook. 35% actually thought that they were better, and only 15% thought that they were not as good quality. And what we're looking for with OER is as good or better, right? Because if it's at least as good, you're getting equal outcomes, but the students aren't having to spend the money, then that's a win. So this is, like I said, the educational kind of background piece to maybe get faculty thinking about why it'd be worthwhile to spend their time looking for an open textbook to adopt. And then we switch into helping faculty to identify an actual textbook in their discipline and consider reviewing it. And I'm going to turn it over to Lynn for that.
I'm Lynn Riggs from Reynolds Community College in Richmond, Virginia. And the next slide is about the next steps. Basically, what can you do now that you've listened to a very shortened version of the workshop that we would give? It's your chance to engage with a textbook and to go shopping. That's what I like to tell students. A lot of looking for library resources is about shopping online, especially. So right now, if you have your phone with you or your iPad or a laptop, if you would like to go to this website, open.umn.edu/open textbooks, we invite you to look under Browse Subjects and take a look. So once you get to the website, the books are arranged in really broad categories of subjects. I'm sorry I don't have the internet up here for you to look at right now, but to take a minute and try to find a text. So this really is the part where you all get to decide, because when the Open Textbook Network was established, they realized that, all the talking that we could do to convince somebody to use an open textbook really wouldn't do any good. Faculty definitely need to take a chance to look at materials themselves and make their own choices, because it really is up to you to control the quality and be responsible, and of course, have quality materials for our students to learn from. So take a look. Once you get to the website, remember that all of the materials are available. These are all complete. These all have to be a complete textbook, and they all have to be completely available online, either by EPUB or a PDF, or just you could download it online. Another thing to keep in mind is that all of these textbooks are ones that have been and are in use at institutions of higher education, either in use or affiliated with institutions of higher education. And they all must be an original textbook, not a derivative. So the next slide I'm going to show you is these are the 10 criteria that once you take a look at a textbook that you would consider if you were to write a review. So as the process works, you would attend a workshop and then find a textbook and then write a review. And when you write a review, there are these 10 criteria to cover, and it's pretty painless. I will tell you, I helped 25 faculty member at Reynolds this past fall, and 15 of them actually participated and wrote reviews and received $200 stipends. And these 10 criteria, we were told by Dave, who runs the Open Textbook Library, he said, I don't even look at the reviews. I just make sure that the review has been done. It's met the criteria. They're actually, you get a chance to rate them from 1 to 5 on a scale of 1 to 5. What the process really is inviting all of you all as faculty to engage in a textbook, and that's what's the most important thing. And then because, once you really fully engage with a textbook, to consider adopting it and to make it a part of your course. And then this is a list of the Open Textbook Network campus leaders that have been trained in the state of Virginia. They all came to a workshop last fall at JMU. So if there's anyone at your school, they could help you get to a workshop. And if you all are from a school that doesn't have an open textbook campus leader, come and talk to us at the end, and we could try to help you do that. And so now I'm going to open it up for questions, and we'll all be available to help you all with questions. Yes, sir.
To write a review before you can adapt the book?
No, you don't. You don't. You do not have to write a review. They just found that the process works best when a faculty member fully engages with a textbook enough to write a review. So it's a form of encouragement.
And you do have to write the review in order to receive the $200 stipend through the Viva OTN partnership. But no, you can adapt yourself.
A lot of times when I talk about OER with some of the faculty at our college, they do talk about Sorry, everybody. They do talk about how it's going to take a lot of time for them to change textbooks and adopt over. I never really thought that argument was sound. Outside of learning a new platform that you might be using to bring that textbook, how is the time requirements for adding OER any different than you get a new textbook that your division tells you to use? You don't go through that paper textbook and decide which chapters are relevant, which ones aren't, and tear those out. You don't go through and X out the questions in the back of the chapter that are not relevant to your teaching. Why would a faculty member think they need to do that for an OER book when they don't do it for the paper one and use that as an argument why it would take more time? So outside of using a different platform like Blackboard, where do you see the additional time requirement being for adoption?
Well, if you don't mind, one of the reasons that the OTN actually does focus on textbooks in particular is that exact same argument. You are, in fact, doing this work for your print textbooks, or not. You should be. So hopefully you are. And if you are, then the process for doing this for an openly licensed online textbooks that are also free for your students should be the same. The time commitment may come into play when you have to go out and get different pieces of OER material and combine into modules, and that can be quite time consuming. But the reason they truly do focus on the textbooks is for that exact reason. The time commitment is much less, and particularly for folks who are newer to OERs in general. So it's not necessarily just as easy, but it is easier to do a whole openly licensed textbook. And so that's the draw, and that's the hope in assisting faculty with adoption through the OTN network, is that by providing textbooks, that argument is null and void.
I think some of the, whoa, that's too close. Some of the extra time commitment comes because experienced instructors have slide sets, for example, that are using copyrighted materials they have to sub out because you can't use materials your students don't pay for anymore. And you know, there's a little bit, just a very little bit of sort of platform stuff that some instructors like to use, the publishers' homework platforms that are a little harder with that, and that becomes a time issue to, if you've been using it and you're experienced in using it and you no longer can use it, that becomes a time issue. I'm just saying that that's some of the contribution. It's not the book itself that is the time commitment issue. Just, that's my 2 cents. I'll stop talking.
Oh, well, I was just going to add one thing on that, is that, and thank you for bringing that up, we do hear a lot of faculty concern about those, I guess what I'd call it, ancillary materials or supplementary materials provided by publishers. And a lot of the open textbook publishers are starting to try to address that. So OpenStax, for example, now has sets of instructor resources, of slides and quiz sets that come with their books. And they've also established a partnership with OER Commons, where there are hubs for each of the OpenStax textbooks where faculty who have adopted them and taken the time to create some of that material have then posted that for with Creative Commons license for other people to adopt. And I know that everybody likes to put their own individual spin on things, but if you're already adopting exactly what the publisher has put together for you and maybe making some changes to that, then it's very similar through OER Commons.
Individual spin, right? So is your individual spin worth that much money out of pocket for students who don't necessarily have it?
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry, Dan.
This question is for Olivia. I know Tidewater has perhaps still a very interesting OER Pathways course. This sounds briefer, easier to get faculty to participate because of a shorter time, but does the Pathways course still exist? And who goes to which? Do you have most faculty go to this or to Pathways? And for those in the room who don't know about Pathways, you might describe that briefly.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, so at Tidewater, we have Z degree programs where students can, well, we have 1 and 2, 3 more in process, where students can get an entire 2-year degree without having to buy any textbooks. So for Z degree, faculty who teach in that take a much more intensive 6-week online course called Pathways, which is facilitated by our librarians, where they go much more in depth into all of these things and actually have assignments to do and discussions. So that is a requirement for faculty who want their course to have the official Z degree stamp on it, kind of like if anybody does the TOPS Elite, like the online teaching certifications. This we haven't actually done yet. We're going to do in May at TCC because we wanted to do it as part of our Faculty Learning Institute. So I will find out who decides to come to that. But we have a lot of faculty who don't necessarily care about teaching in the Z degree program. They just want to, they either don't like their textbook and they want to switch, and why not switch to one that's free, or I just are hearing about this OER thing and want to get involved. And so this would probably be more appropriate for somebody like that who may not have the time to invest in a full 6-week online course.
I would just like to add, as Olivia stated in her portion of the presentation, that the workshop is generally an hour to an hour and a half, where the Pathways course is 6 weeks at Tidewater. So,
it is somewhat of a time commitment issue as well. And I know at Piedmont we plan on offering both an adapted version of the Pathways course and the OTN network workshop.
If you have a text required in your department that you need to use, so if you would to adapt, if I would to adapt on my own, do I have to go to the dean or the department chair to ask for permission to? And one time also, I don't know if this is true or not. It was early on, maybe 5, 6 years ago. I come to my knowledge that you're not supposed to say in the class, buy the textbook online. You need to go to the bookstore because somehow the bookstore budget, I don't know, I'm not aware. So now, if you order this, if you adapt this stuff, how would the college feel about the budget of the bookstore? Did the budget of bookstore help finance the college somehow?
Do you want me to answer? Do you want me?
Well, why don't you start? And if I have anything to say, I'll jump in.
Okay, to address your first question, yes. If you have a departmental textbook that your department is required to use, then yes, you need to work with your dean and your fellow faculty members to ensure that this is an okay thing to do and to adopt in your class. So that's step one. As far as referring your students to online shops to buy textbooks apart from the bookstore, that's in the contract. So if you have Follett, is it Follett?
That's what most of you have. TCC has Barnes & Noble.
Yeah, so for those of us who have Follett, it's in the contract that you aren't supposed to be doing that. However, that's when you have adopted a textbook that is offered through the bookstore. If you adopt an open textbook that is not in any way, related to the bookstore, you don't have to worry about that. So adopting an open textbook, that's your decision as a faculty member. The contract that the college has with the bookstore does not come into play. The only time that contract comes into play is when you tell your students to go buy it from Amazon instead of Follett because of the contract. Oh, okay, so you're one of the few. Most of us have Follett, so.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I'll let Olivia.
Tidewater also has Barnes & Noble, and I only know what we have done at our institution. Faculty who teach an OER course, when the student goes to the bookstore to look up their textbook, it just says no textbook required. So what the faculty typically do are just post the link to where they can download the open textbook online in the syllabus or in their Blackboard course. And as Crystal was saying, it's not like there's competition in that case in that same way as if you were buying a book that the bookstore offered, through another vendor. I have heard, people always ask about the bookstore and how does the bookstore feel about this. We don't have any specific examples at TCC, but I know I've heard other institutions say that their bookstores sometimes are willing to cooperate with them on this because a higher percentage of the bookstore revenue is actually through their T-shirts and other types of goods besides textbooks. That may be a little different for community colleges than for four-year schools, but that the bookstores are already struggling so much with all the competition for textbooks that it might be in their best interest to work with the faculty or libraries who are interested in kind of this open textbook movement.
Just a suggestion for those colleges adopting OER, if the faculty is going to have students using these and the students want to print the material, in our library at Central Virginia Community College, we don't mind how many pages the student prints, but they must pay for those pages. So it would be nice if the faculty would suggest that they check with us what our printing costs are, because we can't afford them to be printing reams of paper and then walking out the door with that.
Yeah, I think that's one of those issues that, since this is still a new initiative for a lot of people that we're kind of working out as we go, it is nice for students to have the option to do that if they want to, but they don't have to, as long as they're able to access the text online. At least they have some version of the textbook they can get to. OpenStax, for example, does versions of their textbooks at a much lower cost. But again, it's an option rather than a requirement that you would have to buy that. So.
I just had one thing to add. At Reynolds, we've just recently, in our OER task force, we have changed the textbook adoption policy to include OERs. So that is a way to make this all work within your college. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, you have a question. I thought you were telling us.
No, I know. No, I actually have a question. I'm sorry, but I'm very curious about this. Given that this is open educational resources and that they are online, and I would actually ask faculty this as well, what are we to do when they say, Verizon's down, sorry, I couldn't do the work last night because it's all online, I don't have enough data to be able to do it without Wi-Fi. We could say, well, you can come to our libraries and situations like that, but as we know, we have a very diverse community of students, and not all of them, it's not always feasible to have them on campus, maybe late at night or at other times in which they could access, the services that we have. So I'm just curious how you kind of combat that situation.
Some answers. Okay, can I just say one thing before we go on? We're pretty much at our time. So I just want to say one thing really quickly. Please evaluate the session by going to the New Horizons 2017 app and evaluating the Open Textbook Network session. So please do that. But go ahead. I don't know if they're going to kick us out of the room.
One of the things that you can do with OpenStax or any of this is download the PDF, because once you have the PDF, you can go anywhere with it. You don't have to be on the internet, and you have it for life. So download the PDF.
Good answer.
Yes. And with that, we'll end. Thank you.